thank you so much for choosing this workshop, and I'm so glad to have you here. Well, my name is Cindy, and I currently work as a program coordinator at Trinity Western University in Ottawa location. And an important background about me that basically inspired our session today is my experience being an international student coming to North America for the first time. So I came to Canada for the first time in 2016, barely speaking English, and I had to enroll in an intensive English program. At that time, I was the only Indonesian. I was fully on my own, and I had never been out of Asia. And also, I did not understand the culture and the language. So I had no friends in my first year, and I did not want to be engaged with the campus community. People were really friendly, like a lot of people say about Canadians, but no one necessarily wanted to be my friend. Until the next year, in 2017, I met my now best friend, Miranda, who is the first person that showed me that she wants to be my friend. And she did not just think that it's cool for me to be a friend that she knows on campus, but she also introduced me and included me into her community. And this was when I felt like I belong and that I had my place on campus. Our friendship is what inspired this session, but most importantly is 1 Peter 4:10, which is also the verse for us this year. In the ESV version, it says that each of you should use whatever gifts you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. So we'll dive into how I interpret it means and how it relates well into our topic today. So gifts that you've received is not a practical gift of playing sports or being good at subject, but also include our gifts of comfort, familiarity, and fluency in a space that we're in. And as faithful stewards, it means that we're not the owner of the gifts and we're not entitled to it. Instead, we're called to manage them well and use it for the glory of God. And an aspect of God's grace extends beyond forgiveness, but also the opportunity for hospitality that also reflects God's grace. And hospitality in this context is not just an invitation to enter a space, but it's making a space in our life for someone else's needs, especially when it's inconvenient and uncomfortable. So keep this in mind as we go through this session. So when I talk about language learning is really hard, but sadly that is not the only struggle. The hardest struggle is cross-cultural communication. And there are three struggles that comes out of cross-cultural communication, and for me, is that it's beyond vocabulary because it's actually a culture. To be a part of a community, you have to learn more about a culture, and it has no dictionary. You must learn slangs, and sometimes to feel interaction, there's that like unspoken expectation to have that a lot of mutuality and knowing the same thing. And there's also non-verbal interpretations because language is beyond words. And in different cultures, there's different interpretation for body language, gesture, eye contact, and personal space. And it can easily be misread. And then lastly, there's also different cultural values because some of us are maybe more direct, some of us are maybe more indirect, and we see time differently, and etc. And so the challenge of language learning and the hard work of cross-cultural communication is what created the barriers. But as leaders, especially as Christian leaders, we're called to be a bridge. So then what does it look like to be a bridge? Well, from my experience, I've created a framework that I called LIGHT. And a bit disclaimer before we dive deep into what is light. I just don't want you to expect this to be a quick fix method, as there's no quick fix method or solution to this, as a quick fix mindset will result in uniformity instead of unity, and the worst of them all is that it's going to be hurting more than helping. So the goal is for you to learn how to walk alongside others experiencing language barrier and use this skill that you learn to adapt in different situations. And so note that it will be a long process and that it requires a lot of patience. Okay, so first one, learn. First of all, just think quickly about a time when you experienced culture shock. Okay, well, I hope you can think of at least one because I believe that we all have experienced culture shock to some degree, like coming to university from high school. And in some way or another, it's the first thing that we can start to empathize with their experience. Okay, when we think about that time when we struggle with culture shock, the first thing that we need is not someone who knows nothing about us, knows nothing about our story, our struggle, and our feeling to tell us what to do and to teach us their ways or to fix it their ways. I don't know about you, but the first thing that I need is usually someone to really listen and learn about my struggles and how did I even get there. So when you see other people struggle, learn. Learn who they are, learn their culture, learn their struggles, learn their story, and etc. And then be inclusive. A very important thing to note here is that being inclusive is not in any way the same as being invitational. It goes beyond invitations. And in this context, especially, it means to also be inclusive of them in conversations and in a space where you invite them in. I have a little story that I have always hold dear to my heart about my best friend Miranda that I talked about earlier. She's from Texas, and when we were students, she would invite me to her house for Christmas, and I would go there to spend my Christmas break with her family. And in this picture are all her closest friends from high school, and they were celebrating their annual Christmas soiree, and I was invited. I came, but usually in this type of situation, I was usually the clueless one. I was the quiet one, and I would just sit in discomfort, nodding and smiling, pretending as if I understand everything and that I would totally fit in with this group. But to understand everything and to fit in well is basically impossible to do on my own. Why is that? Because these people basically grew up together in the same town. They went to school together, grew up together in the same church. Their parents are friends. They all speak English as their first language. And in fact, two of them were English majors. So I remember sitting there and having no idea what they were saying and just laugh and they laugh, occasionally nodding, and most importantly, staying quiet most of the time. And I remember so clearly to this day, Miranda whispered in my ear, she was sitting next to me, "Are they making sense to you?" And I said, not wanting to be embarrassed, I said, "Kind of." Well, I clearly did not. And at this point, she learned that I would never say yes nor ask because I don't want to be a burden, and that's kind of my culture. So then she just started explaining each time and would whisper in my ear. And I realized how much that meant to me and how much she's done that since the beginning of our friendship. She would invite me but would never let me figure things out alone. She would explain to me and make sure that I understood and not be overwhelmed. And therefore, kind of opened the door for me to be comfortable to ask and wanting to be her friend more. And the next one is gentleness. Listening to someone who is learning a new language is not easy. It's tiring and it takes a lot of patience, listening and understanding. But sometimes you have no idea how much patience means to a lot other people who are learning English and how it actually opens a lot of opportunities for deeper connection. And the next one is the key that you need the most to engage well to be a bridge in your leadership is humility. And in this context, humility requires listening more than speaking, wait patiently as they search for words, not interrupting or correcting, which shows that you value their voice more than your own comfort or speed of communication. And you also don't assume that language proficiency is a measure of capability or intelligence, because it's not. Learn about the language as it shifts the dynamics from I teach, you learn, from we learn from each other. And basically, humility is saying that I see your whole self before I try to add something to you. And ultimately, humility in this context means that you're walking with them and not ahead of them. It's about supporting without overshadowing, guiding without controlling, and being deeply human together in the process of learning. Then the last one is teach. So if you ask me, Cindy, why does teaching comes last? Should even it be last? Well, teachings come last because true connection and understanding must come first in order for teaching to be effective and for it to have a lasting impact. When someone is navigating a language barrier, their sense of belonging is fragile. So teaching without relationship can feel like pressure or evaluation instead of support. And for language learners, language is tied to their culture, family, and sometimes self-worth. So if we teach without first honoring that, then we risk turning education into an erasure instead of empowerment. And to teach doesn't necessarily mean that it's our turn to talk, because the most powerful teaching actually happens quietly through modeling patience, curiosity, and through our presence. Ultimately, teaching is the fruit of trust, but not the foundation of it. It's not what you just give it to someone, but it's something that you co-create with them. So yeah, my hope is that this framework teaches you that those that we serve aren't just recipients of our knowledge, but they're actually teachers of new perspective, resilience, and culture. Okay, so how did Jesus model this, do you think? Well, it reminds me of the story of Jesus, his interaction with the women in Samaria. I think it really models a powerful framework for what a transformative conversation looks like. Well, if you think about it, he begins by asking for a drink and not just start a conversation, but he truly engaged in her perspective. He actually already knows her story. He allows her to speak, showing that learning involves listening and not assuming. And he also breaks through every barrier: racial, gender, cultural, and moral. A Jew speaking to a Samaritan, a man speaking to a woman, a rabbi to someone seen as a sinner. He creates a space where she is fully included and valued. He also addresses her past honestly without condemnation. He was very gentle. He doesn't shame her or avoid the hard truth, but he reveals it gently to bring healing and not humiliation. And although he had no need for help, Jesus asks her for a drink, creating a space where she can give and not just receive. His approach is not from above, but alongside her, meeting her where she is. And then after listening, including and honoring her dignity, Jesus finally reveals his identity, and then he teaches not by preaching at her, but by engaging in her soul. His goal is for transformation and not information, which is a truth that is shared in love. So here's an invitation for you to lead well through breaking the barriers and build a bridge that help them trust, feel, truly belong, and known. It's more than just wanting them to contribute well, but care for them so that they feel safe to contribute. I hope you learned something, and thank you so much for joining me in this session. Bye, guys.